Your stuff is in storage unit 42B on 5th Street. The key's under the mat. Madison's voicemail was the only explanation I got after returning from a 9-month deployment in Afghanistan. I stood outside my apartment building at 2 a.m., duffel bag in hand, staring at windows that used to be mine. The locks had been changed, my name was off the mailbook, and my entire life had been reduced to a storage unit. I listened to the message twice, then calmly said to myself, "Understood completely." What Madison didn't know was that this betrayal would cost her everything she thought she'd gained. My name is Kyle Brennan. I'm 26 years old, Army Sergeant with the 82nd Airborne Division. I'd spent 9 months in Afghanistan, leading a squad through some of the most dangerous territory in Helmand Province. Every day over there, I'd thought about coming home to Madison, to our apartment in Fayetteville, North Carolina, to the life we'd planned together. The deployment had been extended twice. What started as a 6-month rotation stretched to 9 months of firefights, convoy escorts, and sleepless nights wondering if I'd make it home alive. Through it all, Madison's letters and video calls kept me grounded, gave me something to fight for. Our relationship had started 2 years earlier when I was stationed at Fort Bragg. Madison worked at a coffee shop near base, and I'd stop by every morning before PT. She was studying nursing at the community college, working part-time to pay for school. We moved in together after 8 months, splitting rent on a 2-bedroom apartment that felt like paradise compared to barracks life. When my deployment orders came through, Madison cried for hours. She'd never dated a soldier before, didn't understand the demands of military life. I promised her it would be temporary, that we'd get through it together, that I'd come home and we'd build something permanent. For the first 6 months, everything seemed fine. Madison sent care packages filled with homemade cookies and photos. We video called twice a week when internet allowed. She told me about nursing school, her job, the friends she'd made while I was gone. But communication started becoming irregular around month 7. Madison's responses to my messages grew shorter, less personal. She stopped sending photos, stopped asking about my missions. When I mentioned it during one of our rare calls, she blamed stress from school and work. "I'm just tired, Kyle. This is harder than I thought it would be." I understood the difficulty of long-distance relationships during deployment. Half the guys in my unit dealt with similar problems. Some marriages survived, others didn't. I thought Madison and I were stronger than that. The warning signs became clearer during my final month overseas. Madison stopped answering my calls entirely, responding only to text messages with brief, impersonal replies. When I asked about picking me up from the airport, she said she had to work and suggested I take a cab. That should have prepared me for what I found at 2 a.m. outside our apartment building. The storage unit on 5th Street contained 9 months of my life packed into cardboard boxes. My clothes, books, military memorabilia, the engagement ring I'd bought before deployment, everything thrown together without care or organization. Madison had kept nothing that belonged to me, erased every trace of our relationship from the apartment we'd shared. I spent the night in a nearby motel trying to process what had happened. The woman I'd thought about every day for 9 months had systematically erased me from her life while I was overseas defending our country. The apartment we'd planned to turn into a home had become a place where I was no longer welcome. The next morning, I started making calls, first to our landlord, then to mutual friends, trying to understand how Madison had managed to remove me from the lease and change the locks without my knowledge or consent. The landlord explained that Madison had brought him legal documents showing power of attorney, claiming I'd authorized her to handle all apartment matters during my deployment. She'd also provided what appeared to be a notarized letter from me, agreeing to transfer the lease entirely to her name. I'd never signed any such documents. Our mutual friend Jessica filled in more details when I met her for coffee later that day. Madison had been dating someone new for the past 4 months, a local guy named Trevor who worked construction. They'd moved in together the week after Madison cleared out my belongings. Kyle, I wanted to tell you, but Madison made us all promise not to say anything. She said you guys had broken up and you'd asked her to handle moving your stuff out. The betrayal cut deeper than enemy fire ever had. Madison hadn't just ended our relationship. She'd forged documents, lied to friends, and stolen my home while I was risking my life overseas. But Madison had made one crucial mistake. The apartment had been leased under both our names, with specific military clauses protecting deployed service members. What she'd done wasn't just betrayal, it was a federal crime. I contacted base legal services that afternoon. The JAG officer who reviewed my case was a veteran herself, who'd seen similar situations before. Sergeant Brennan, forging a service member's signature and illegally evicting them during deployment violates the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Madison could face both federal charges and civil liability. Within 48 hours, base legal had contacted local authorities and initiated a fraud investigation. Madison's forged power of attorney documents were examined by handwriting experts. Her claims about our relationship were contradicted by deployment records showing we'd been in contact throughout my overseas service. 3 days after my return, Madison finally called me directly. Kyle, I heard you're causing problems about the apartment. We need to talk. I'm listening. Look, I know this looks bad, but I can explain everything. Trevor and it just happened. I didn't plan for this. What about the forged documents? I had to do something. You were gone for so long, and I couldn't afford the rent by myself. Trevor said he could help if his name was on the lease. So you committed fraud. It wasn't fraud. We were practically broken up anyway. You were never here. I was deployed, Madison. I was serving my country. Don't give me that hero speech. You chose the military over me. The conversation revealed everything I needed to know about who Madison really was. In her mind, my deployment was a choice rather than duty. My service was abandonment rather than sacrifice. If watching entitled civilians learn that military service comes with legal protections makes your heart race, hit subscribe, because Madison's about to discover that screwing over a deployed soldier has serious consequences. The investigation moved quickly. Madison's forged documents were obvious to professionals. My signature was inconsistent, the notarization was fake, and the power of attorney contained language no soldier would use when authorizing apartment management. More damaging was the timeline. Phone records showed Madison had been in contact with Trevor for months before she claimed our relationship ended. Bank records revealed she'd been using money from our joint account to pay for dates and gifts for her new boyfriend. Madison had essentially funded her affair with money I'd earned overseas. The federal prosecutor assigned to the case explained Madison's potential charges during our meeting the following week. Document fraud, identity theft, violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. She was looking at federal prison time. We also discovered that Madison used your VA benefits information to apply for housing assistance, claiming you'd abandoned her during deployment. That's additional fraud. I hadn't known about the benefits fraud. Madison had been collecting assistance meant for military families while actively erasing me from her life. 2 weeks after my return, Madison's new life began unraveling. Federal agents interviewed Trevor about his knowledge of the forged documents. Their landlord learned that Madison had used fraudulent information to secure their new lease. Her nursing school received notification about the ongoing federal investigation. Madison called me again, this time panicked. Kyle, I think we can work this out. Maybe I made some mistakes, but this federal investigation is crazy. Can't you just drop the charges? I didn't file charges, Madison. Federal prosecutors did that when they discovered you'd committed multiple felonies. Please, this is going to ruin my life. I'll lose my nursing license before I even graduate. You should have thought about that before forging my signature and stealing my home. I'll give you back the apartment. I'll pay for the storage fees. We can pretend this never happened. It's too late for that. The conversation ended with Madison crying, finally understanding that her actions had consequences beyond just ending our relationship. 3 months later, Madison pled guilty to federal fraud charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. She received 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay restitution for the storage fees, legal costs, and fraudulent benefits she'd claimed. More importantly, her nursing license application was denied due to the federal conviction. The career she'd been building while I was deployed was destroyed by her own choices. I used the settlement money to put a down payment on a small house near base. The VA loan process was straightforward, and within 6 months I had my own place, something Madison could never take away or forge documents to steal. Trevor, meanwhile, discovered he'd been dating a felon. Their relationship ended when Madison's legal troubles became public. He'd thought he was gaining a girlfriend. Instead, he'd gained an accomplice to federal crimes. The case became a teaching example at base legal services, illustrating how civilian partners sometimes underestimate the legal protections afforded to deployed service members. Madison's assumption that she could simply erase me while I was overseas had cost her everything she'd tried to gain. A year after my return, I was promoted to staff sergeant and assigned to a training unit at Fort Bragg. The deployment trauma had been easier to process than the betrayal, but both had taught me valuable lessons about trust and resilience. I ran into Jessica at the grocery store one evening. She mentioned that Madison had moved back in with her parents after losing her apartment and Trevor. She was working retail while trying to rebuild her life after the federal conviction. "She asks about you sometimes," Jessica said. "I think she regrets how things ended." "Regret doesn't undo federal crimes." "I know. I just thought you should know she's struggling." I appreciated Jessica's concern, but Madison's struggles were consequences of her own choices. She'd made deliberate decisions to betray someone who was serving overseas, then compounded those choices with fraud and theft. The apartment building where Madison had changed my locks was visible from my new house. Sometimes I'd drive past it, remembering the shock of standing outside at 2 a.m. with nowhere to go. But those memories no longer caused anger. They reminded me of my own resilience. Madison had tried to erase 9 months of my life while I was deployed. Instead, she'd erased her own future through choices that revealed who she really was when tested by separation. The engagement ring I'd bought before deployment remained in my dresser drawer for months. Eventually, I returned it to the jeweler for a full refund. The life I'd planned with Madison had been an illusion. 2 years later, I met Alexis, a fellow veteran who'd served 2 deployments herself. She understood the demands of military life and the importance of loyalty during difficult times. When we moved in together, she insisted on joint ownership of everything. No hidden documents, no secret plans. The difference became crystal clear through comparison. Madison had seen my deployment as abandonment. Alexis saw it as duty. Madison had used my absence to build a new life. Alexis would have used it to strengthen our relationship. Madison's voicemail directing me to a storage unit had seemed like the end of everything. Instead, it became the beginning of understanding what real partnership looked like and the importance of choosing people whose values aligned with mine. Madison had gambled that a deployed soldier couldn't fight back against fraud and betrayal. She'd learned that federal law protects service members specifically because people like her exist. Civilians who see military deployment as opportunity rather than sacrifice.